The Missouri Compromise was passed on February 7th of 1819 and took place under the presidency of James Monroe. This was the first real conflict between the northern and southern slavery factions. When Missouri asked to be annexed into the Union as a slave state, the North freaked out. They were about to be outrepresented by the southern pro-slave states. In the end, it resulted in a two-part solution. To prevent future conflict, they made it so if any territories north of the 3630 parallel were to become states, they were to be non-slave states. And the second part of the compromise fixed the current problem. If the South got Missouri, then the North was to annex Maine as an anti slave state for equal representation.
Before November 6, 1860, tension between the North and the South had reached an all-time high, with a war that was inevitable. To lead America, a strong president was crucial. As a previous lawyer that had failed to be elected into the Senate, Lincoln was a rising name in the election. And running for presidency, when it came time for the vote, Lincoln had almost no support from the South and was able to get the majority of Republican votes from the North. The decision for the president was only chosen by half the country, which only escalated the strain that existed between the two sides. At this time, the Union also had declared Kansas, Nevada, and West Virginia free lands, multiplying the reasons for states to secede. As Lincoln was elected, a huge responsibility had been rested on his shoulders for peace, as he would influence America forever.
Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union, and they did so on December 20th of 1860. Once it became apparent that Lincoln was to take office, they left. They did this because at the time it seemed like he was a radical abolitionist who had always intended to abolish slavery. The outgoing president, James Buchanan, did nothing to stop their succession and left it for Lincoln to deal with. After all, he was headed out. But if he had stopped them, we may have avoided any more states from seceding and maybe even the Civil War. The secession of several states, also known as the Winter of Secession, was just as it sounds, a series of states seceding for the same reasons as South Carolina. 6 total states left the Union during this time. The first, next to South Carolina, was Mississippi on January 9th of 1861, only 20 days after South Carolina left the Union. Alabama, Georgia, Texas, and Florida soon followed in tow. The states faced little resistance, although their secession was considered legal, but it was left unnoticed. This resulted in them taking hold of the federal offices in their states, including forts, and together creating the Confederate States of America. The Battle of Fort Sumter was the first battle of the Civil War, and it took place over the course of 2 days and ended on April 14th of 1861. It was caused when the Union's troops in South Carolina were forced out of the state as Carolina acquired control of its forts. They then retreated, much to Carolina's distaste, to a disputed fort between the Union and the Confederacy, Fort Sumter, which was just off the coast of Charleston. The South had many reasons for attacking this fort, the first of which being whoever controlled it controlled the navy in the area, and therefore controlled the imports and exports from that area, which were a valuable asset for the South. Also, the South wanted to annex Virginia into the Confederacy, and the only way to get them to do that was pressuring them to choose a side in the war, the Civil War. With only 60 troops at Fort Sumter, it would be stupid for them not to attack. The South's first move was cutting off the supply lines to the fort. They shot away the Star of the West, forcing it to retreat with the supplies for the fort back north. They proceeded to bombard the fort with over 6,000 men. During the bombardment, one man died, and he was the only casualty in the battle and the first casualty of the Civil War. After 2 days of heated negotiations, the commander of the fort, Robert Anderson, sent up the white flag of surrender. Ugh.
Being the bloodiest of battles of the Civil War, on July 1st, 1863, the tension was at its highest between the Confederates and the Union soldiers. Being the last battle in General Lee's northern invasion, this battle is seen as the turning point where the upper hand was shifted in the war. Before this point, the Union had mostly underestimated the South and never took the rising threat as serious as it was. Before this battle, the South was the strongest it had been in the war, with a collection of battles won, massive amounts of land owned, and more planned invasions to come. At this battle, that all changed. Almost a third of the Confederate generals were either wounded or killed, and with over 23,000 casualties and losses to soldiers, General Lee's invasion had retreated for a clear Union victory. Over 4 months after this battle, Abraham Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address, where the fallen soldiers were honored and the Union was inspired to continue strong. Now the Union was on a roll and confident, continuing to stand strong after the battle at Gettysburg. On November 16, 1864, General Sherman and his troops went into Atlanta, Georgia, and carried out a very risky but effective move that laid a deep punch into the Confederates. Once General Sherman arrived, as much disruption as possible was caused to the city of Atlanta. The goal of General Sherman's march was to get inside of the heart of the Confederacy and disrupt as much as possible, from destroying the railroad and transportation systems, burning the city's resources, and capturing or destroying as many military supplies as they possibly could. Over about a month of time, a general and his soldiers had marched over 250 miles to Savannah, Georgia, where the people surrendered in order to protect the city, where the ports of Savannah were captured, a huge trading port for the Confederates. I beg to present to you a Christmas gift to the city of Savannah, with 150 guns and plenty of ammunition, also about 25,000 bales of cotton, which was in a letter written to Lincoln from General Sherman on Christmas. The last battle of the Civil War was fought on April 9th, 1865 in the Appomattox, Virginia, an attempt for a final push from the South. Even though loss was inevitable, the Confederates had to do everything they could to keep slavery instated. Midway through the battle, though, the Confederates were suffering heavy losses, and General Lee knew that the war was over. There was no need to waste another life. At the Appomattox Courthouse, Confederate General Lee and Union General Grant met to discuss terms for the South's surrender. After this point, the rest of the Confederate Army left in the field no longer received any further plans or orders, and were forced to go home without any command. Once again, the power of the Union was restored over the whole of America. Lincoln had followed through with his duty to restore peace. The war was over.
Lincoln was killed in a theater during a play called Our American Cousin by, as most of you probably know, the infamous John Wilkes Booth, an actor, a Confederate spy, and soon to be an assassin. Booth was originally going to kidnap Lincoln and use him as a ransom. He wanted the North to release all of their POWs from the Confederacy. He changed his mind last minute after Lincoln gave a speech about how he supported black rights. Okay. He then decided that he was going to assassinate Lincoln and Ulysses S. Grant, who was also attending the play. Fortunately, Grant had a change of plans last minute and couldn't come. Although Grant was not present, Booth was not deterred. He snuck in and waited, and when Lincoln dismissed his guard to get a drink at a bar across the street, Booth took the opportunity and shot Lincoln point blank in the head. Lincoln survived, but he was in a coma and died 9 hours later. Booth was brought to justice 10 days later, when he was found and killed by Sergeant Boston Corbett.
The 13th Amendment had been debated, and redebated for over a year before it was finally passed. Not only was there an economic, political, and legal reason behind the importance of this bill, but a moral piece also had a huge effect on the fate of this document. Towards the end of the war, the 13th Amendment had become a very important moral dilemma to solve for Lincoln that was pushed as hard as possible by the president. With racism still a major part of America, complete equality was not a popular decision for even the most Northerners. After lots of political maneuvering, timing, and persuading, Lincoln had done everything he could do to move the 13th Amendment into law. When the law had been put up for debate by the House of Representatives, only a couple of votes made the difference between the end of slavery and the continuation. This also followed the conclusion of the war according to Lincoln's timing, where it was set into place before the Confederates had surrendered. After Lincoln had died, the law was completely ratified into the whole of America on December 6, 1865.
One of those actors that are just all up in people's business. I'm up in your business!
Those are normal actors, okay?
Boom, baby!
Pow pow!
Why is this so crazy? To secede. As a
president was being chosen, a huge responsibility rested on.
All normal actors.
Don't be an actor, be a voiceover guy.
Those are actors.
They don't do any acting with their body, they just
Yes, they
speak.
do. Most people that voice over also do acting with their body.